Have you ever felt completely drained after a conversation, like a part of you went missing? Not because it was loud or aggressive, but because you gave too much of yourself? Again, what if I told you that this invisible fatigue is not just emotional, it's psychological, and that you're leaking something more precious than time, your psychic energy? In the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore the hidden cost of always being emotionally available. You'll discover how people unconsciously manipulate you through projection, why silence is your most underrated weapon, and how to begin the deep process of individuation, becoming who you truly are without apology. I'm not here to tell you to cut everyone off. I'm here to help you understand why you feel exhausted, even when nothing seems wrong. I've been there too, smiling when I wanted to retreat, explaining myself when silence would have been more honest, saying yes when my soul was screaming no. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you're tired of being the emotional emergency button in everyone else's life. But what if that tiredness isn't weakness? What if it's a signal, a message from within telling you it's time to protect your energy? Not just physically, but psychically. Let's begin. There's a kind of power most people never talk about. It doesn't show up with shouting arguments or loud declarations. It's quiet, almost invisible. It happens the moment you stop explaining yourself, when you stop showing up for every conversation, every request, every unspoken expectation. It's the power of withdrawing. Most of us have been taught to fight, to defend, to prove our point. But few of us were taught that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is walk away without a word, not in anger, not in fear, but in clarity. Because when you withdraw, not to punish, but to protect, you shift the energy of every room you leave. Let me tell you about a friend of mine, Rachel. She used to be the person everyone called when things went wrong. Breakups, bad days, late night panic texts. She'd always answer. But she started noticing something. When she needed someone, the line went silent. So one day, she did something different. She didn't confront, didn't accuse, didn't post a dramatic quote online. She simply stopped responding, and something strange happened. The very people who took her for granted began to panic. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? Where did you go? But Rachel didn't disappear. She just stopped giving her energy away without consent. Here's the truth. When you withdraw from people who've grown used to controlling you through your reactions, you unsettle them because their power was never real. It only worked as long as you kept showing up to play the same role. So no, you're not rude for choosing peace over performance. You're not heartless for protecting your energy. You're just learning a different kind of strength, one that doesn't require explanation, one that doesn't beg to be understood. And that brings us to something deeper. If withdrawing creates such a shift in others, what does being too available do to you? That's exactly what we'll talk about next, because your availability isn't just a habit, it's often a wound in disguise. Let's look at why being too emotionally available is slowly draining your soul. We grow up believing that being kind means being available, that answering every call, replying to every message, helping every time we're asked, somehow makes us better, more lovable, more good. But here's what no one tells you. Being available all the time doesn't make people love you more. It makes them respect you less. Think about it. You wouldn't leave your front door wide open all day for anyone to walk in. But that's exactly what we do with our emotional space. We leave it open, always accessible, always on standby. And over time, something begins to happen. You start feeling tired, but not just physically. You feel emotionally sore, like you've been stretched too thin. And the worst part, you don't even know why. Let me share a story with you. James, a former client of mine, was everyone's go-to guy. Always helpful, always polite, always reachable. But when we started working together, he admitted something that hit me hard. He said I feel invisible, like I exist only when someone needs something from me, but never when I need something back. He wasn't being kind, he was being used, not out of malice, but because he never taught people where his limits were. He thought availability was love, but really, it was self-abandonment in disguise. Here's the trap. When you're always available, people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a function. The comforter, the fixer, the helper, the listener. And once you become a function, your own feelings, needs, and desires begin to fade. Let's be clear. Saying yes all the time isn't a sign of generosity. Sometimes it's a symptom of fear, the fear of being left behind, disliked, or seen as selfish. But that kind of generosity comes with a cost. Your peace, your clarity, your identity. The small lesson: boundaries are not walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who enters, when, and how. Now here's the twist. Why do we even fall into this trap? Why do we feel the need to always be there? What force inside us makes us say yes when our entire body is saying no? To answer that, we need to go deeper into the subconscious patterns at play. This is where Carl Jung's theory of projection comes in. Because sometimes the pressure you feel to be enough isn't even yours to carry. Sometimes the weight you're carrying was never yours to begin with. You just picked it up because someone quietly placed it on your shoulders, wrapped in guilt, in blame, or in silence. That's the power of projection. Carl Jung described projection as what happens when we take something from inside us, something uncomfortable, unhealed, or unwanted, and unconsciously see it in someone else. It's like turning a mirror into a movie screen. We stop owning our emotions and start assigning them. Let me tell you a story. A woman named Claire once told me, "My sister always says I'm too selfish, but I'm the one who drops everything when she calls. I'm the one who shows up." We look closer. Claire's sister constantly made decisions without asking expected favors and never once asked how Claire was doing. But instead of facing her own self-centered patterns, the sister projected them onto Claire. And Claire, she believed it. She carried the guilt. She tried harder. She bent more. Until she finally realized, I'm not the selfish one. I'm just the mirror. Here's the painful truth. When someone labels you in a way that doesn't feel true, when they accuse you of being cold, dramatic, lazy, needy, ask yourself, is this really mine, or am I wearing someone else's reflection? Because emotional manipulators don't always yell. They just push you gently into a role you didn't choose. And if you keep reacting the way they expect, the role sticks. The small lesson: you don't need to argue with projections. You only need to recognize them. Once you do, something powerful happens. You stop performing and start protecting. And that protection comes down to one vital resource, something most of us give away without realizing how precious it is: your psychic energy. Because every time you react, explain, defend, or carry what's not yours, you wake up already tired, not because you didn't sleep enough, but because your mind never stopped running, overthinking that conversation, worrying about someone's tone, replaying what you could have said or shouldn't have said. Sound familiar? That's not just anxiety. That's psychic energy leakage. Carl Jung believed the human psyche functions like an energy system, and just like any system, it has limits. Every thought, every emotion, every inner battle you engage in costs you something. And if you don't know where your energy is going, chances are it's going everywhere. Let me tell you a quick story. I once spoke with a man named Daniel. He told me I don't even do much during the day, but I feel drained, like I've run a marathon with my mind. When we looked closer, Daniel wasn't lazy. He was fighting 1,000 invisible wars, justifying himself in texts, worrying about how people saw him, trying to read between the lines of every conversation. He wasn't physically busy. He was psychically exhausted. And the worst part, most of the things draining his energy weren't real emergencies. They were emotional loops, guilt trips, unfinished arguments in his head, thoughts that didn't deserve his attention but kept stealing his peace. Here's the truth. Every time you respond to a message that irritates you, every time you defend yourself to someone who never listens, every time you enter a discussion just to prove you're not the bad guy, you're spending energy, and not just any energy, the kind that keeps you grounded, present, and calm. The small lesson: start thinking of your attention as currency. Would you give your paycheck to a stranger on the street? No? Then stop giving your inner peace to thoughts and people who haven't earned it. You only get so much energy each day. Protect it like your life depends on it, because in a way it does. And now, let's take a closer look at why we waste this energy in the first place. What's the internal program that makes us say yes when we mean no? Why do we feel the need to please, perform, and explain ourselves endlessly? To answer that, we need to talk about something Jung called the persona. In the next part, we'll explore the mask you've been wearing and how it silently keeps you from being your real self. When people describe you, they probably say, "You're so nice. You're always there. You're just so easy to talk to." And those sound like compliments, but deep down, you're exhausted because being nice has become a full-time job. And behind that role is a part of you quietly whispering, "I don't feel like myself anymore." Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, loved, approved. It's not fake. It's just incomplete. It's the version of you that the world likes the most, but it often comes at the cost of the parts you like the most. Let me share a story. Emma was known as the peacemaker in her family. She always kept the calm, never raised her voice, always smiled. But one day, during a family dinner, someone made a comment that stung. She laughed it off as always, but later that night she cried in her car for 2 hours, not because of what was said, but because she didn't allow herself to say anything back. Her persona, the quiet understanding one had spoken for her. And once again, her true self stayed silent. That's how the trap works. You play the role so well for so long that people forget it's just a role. And worse, you start to forget too. We wear the persona because it feels safer than rejection. But over time, the safety becomes a prison. You say yes when you want to say no. You comfort others when you're the one breaking inside. You stay quiet to keep the peace while slowly losing yours. The small lesson: there's nothing wrong with being kind. But if your kindness comes at the expense of your truth, it's no longer kindness. It's self-abandonment, and no amount of approval from others is worth abandoning yourself. So, how do we begin to take the mask off? How do we reclaim our voice, our space, our truth, without losing the people around us? It starts with something so simple, yet so powerful, most never dare to use it: silence. In the next part, we'll talk about how silence, when used with intention, can become the most profound declaration of your worth. Let's step into that quiet power. Silence used to feel like weakness to me. Growing up, I thought being strong meant having the best comebacks, being quick to respond, proving your point before anyone else could speak. But over time, I've learned something completely different. True strength rarely shouts. It listens, and sometimes it doesn't say anything at all. Not all silence is the same. There's silence born from fear when we're afraid to speak. But then there's another kind. A silence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and realizing you don't need to explain it. That's the kind of silence we're talking about here, strategic silence. Let me share a real moment. My friend Marcus once told me about a meeting at work. Someone accused him unfairly of making a mistake in front of the whole team. Everyone turned to him waiting for a reaction. But instead of jumping in to defend himself, he paused. He looked at the person, then simply said, "Thank you for your input." And then he stayed quiet. No outburst, no defense, no drama. And the room shifted, because nothing is more powerful than a person who refuses to be baited. That's what strategic silence does. It disarms chaos. It creates space for you to respond instead of react. And in that space, something powerful happens. You stay in control of your energy. You don't let other people's emotions rewrite your day. The small lesson: you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And you don't owe everyone a reaction, especially not the ones trying to steal your peace. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is none at all. But here's the thing. When you start practicing this kind of silence, this new way of showing up, not everyone will like it. Some will be confused. Others will be threatened, because your silence takes away the control they once had. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Change is beautiful, but not everyone will clap when you bloom. In fact, the first thing you might notice when you start setting boundaries, choosing silence or pulling back, is resistance. Not from you, from them. It's confusing at first. You'd think people would be happy for your growth, that they'd say good for you. You're taking care of yourself. But instead, they say, "You've changed. You're acting weird. You're not like you used to be." And they're right. You're not. Because now you're no longer available in the ways they relied on. Not emotionally, not mentally, not energetically. And that makes people uncomfortable, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped serving their comfort. Let me share something with you. When Maya started going to therapy, she finally learned how to say no. She stopped over-explaining. She left group chats that drained her. She declined invites that felt more like obligations. But instead of receiving support, she got backlash. "You think you're better than us now. You've become distant." At first, it broke her heart. But eventually, she realized she wasn't being rejected for becoming someone bad. She was being rejected for no longer being convenient. Here's the deeper truth. When you change, you force others to face their own patterns. Your silence reveals their noise. Your boundaries expose their overreach. Your stillness highlights their chaos. And not everyone is ready for that mirror. So they try to pull you back, not out of love, but out of fear. The small lesson: don't confuse their discomfort with your mistake. Sometimes their panic is just proof that your growth is real. You are not obligated to shrink so others can stay comfortable. Let them feel what they need to feel. Your peace is not up for negotiation. Still, the journey doesn't end here. Because once you've created this distance, this space between you and the noise, something else begins to emerge. A kind of sacred stillness. A solitude that isn't empty, but full of presence. In the next part, we'll talk about that space and why the sacred isolation isn't loneliness, but the beginning of true inner freedom. Let's step into it together. At first, it feels like loss. When you stop replying, immediately, stop showing up for every crisis. Stop saying yes to things that drain you. The silence that follows can feel heavy. You wonder if you've done something wrong, but stay with it, because beneath that silence, something sacred begins to grow. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming your true self whole and undivided. And to begin that process, you need something most people avoid at all costs: solitude. Not loneliness, not exile, but sacred isolation, a season where you choose to step away, not to disappear, but to finally appear as who you truly are. Let me tell you about Jacob. He used to spend every weekend with friends, always out, always in the middle of something. But after a tough breakup and a burnout at work, he did something radical. He unplugged. No texts, no calls, no meetups. At first, he felt like a ghost in his own life. He missed the noise, the validation, the sense of being needed. But slowly, something shifted. He started journaling. He read books he had forgotten he owned. He took long walks without music, without distraction. And for the first time in years, he felt clear. Not happy all the time, but honest, grounded, present. This kind of solitude is not a punishment. It's a portal, a space where no one else's voice interrupts your own, where you can remember what you love, what you fear, what you need, without having to explain it to anyone. The small lesson: sometimes the most profound healing happens in silence, not because you're hiding, but because you're finally not performing. And yes, it may feel uncomfortable. People might not understand. They may label you distant, cold, even selfish. But remember, you don't need permission to come home to yourself. And once you've tasted that clarity, you begin to realize something else. You don't have to give everyone access to your life. Not everyone deserves your time, your energy, or your presence. You don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to respond to every message, pick up every call, solve every crisis. You are allowed to be unavailable, not as an accident, but as a conscious decision, because your energy, your peace, your time are not infinite. They're sacred. We live in a world that worships instant replies. If you take too long to respond, people assume you're angry, upset, or distant. But here's a different way to look at it. Maybe your silence isn't a problem. Maybe it's a filter, a quiet way of asking, does this deserve my presence, or just my old patterns of people-pleasing? Let me share a story. Anna used to answer texts within seconds. She'd say yes to every lunch, every favor, every request, even when she was running on empty. But one weekend she tried something new. She turned her phone off for 24 hours. She went for a walk, cooked a meal, read a book, took a nap. And when she turned her phone back on the next day, her inbox was full of messages like, "Where were you? Are you mad at me? Why are you ignoring me?" But one message stood out. It was from an old friend who said, "I'm proud of you. I should try that too." And in that moment, Anna realized something powerful. The right people don't panic when you take space. They respect it. Being consciously unavailable doesn't mean disappearing. It means becoming selective. It means asking yourself, is this message urgent or just loud? Is this request aligned with who I'm becoming? And most importantly, does this interaction leave me more alive or more drained? The small lesson: you are not a 24/7 emotional service line. You're a human being with limits, with needs, with a soul that needs rest. And saying not now is not rejection. It's self-respect. But here's the truth. No one says out loud. The more you honor your own space, the more you'll notice people start disappearing. Not everyone will stay when you stop being constantly available. And that brings us to one final truth, the one that hurts, but also sets you free: the loneliness of the strong. There comes a moment in your journey when things go quiet. Not because you've gone numb, not because you've pushed people away, but because you've finally stopped reaching where you were never truly received. That's the loneliness of the strong. It's not bitterness. It's not isolation. It's the calm that comes after you've chosen yourself, even when it means standing alone. Let me tell you about Leo. For most of his life, he shaped himself around others. He laughed when things weren't funny. He showed up even when he had nothing left to give. He filled silence with words just to avoid the discomfort. But when Leo began setting boundaries, everything changed. People called him distant. Some drifted away. A few even stopped speaking to him altogether. At first, the emptiness was loud, but over time, he started noticing something else. He had energy again. He felt peace walking alone. He laughed not out of obligation, but because something was truly funny. And most importantly, for the first time in years, he recognized himself. This is what no one tells you about healing. It doesn't always end with applause. Sometimes it ends in silence, in distance, in solitude. But that's where the real work begins, because only in that quiet can you rebuild. Not for validation, not for approval, but from your own center. The small lesson: you will lose people when you stop shrinking, but you will find yourself, and what you find will be solid, rooted, unshakable. Being whole doesn't mean being surrounded. It means being enough even when no one's looking. And maybe that's the point of this entire journey, not to become louder, but to become clearer, not to please more, but to protect better, not to be constantly available, but consciously complete. So here's the final question I leave with you. Are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be at peace? Are you ready to stand alone, not because no one wanted you, but because you finally chose you? If this message found you at the right time, I invite you to leave a comment below that simply says, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many of us are ready to walk this quiet, powerful path together. Thank you for listening. You pay, and in the next part, we'll talk about what exactly you're paying with and how to stop the leaks that are silently draining your strength. Let's explore why psychic energy is limited and how to reclaim it before it runs out.